Through its nearly 9 years in existence, ECW, like all wrestling companies, started out in one well-known location, Philadelphia. Have you ever thought about where they expanded to though? I thought it'd be interesting to track ECW's first travels beyond Pennsylvania, to see what interesting stories might come from it. This time I'm going to start from the early days of the company, to them leaving the NWA and changing their name, but I might carry this on if anyone's interested. In this video, we'll look at ECW's first shows outside their home state during the time they were known as Eastern Championship Wrestling. We'll look at why those states were chosen and what stories come from them. Before we get into it, there is an important note to make, in that most of the events I'm going to talk about were house shows, and therefore not filmed for television or home video. In a kayfabe commentaries release in their Timeline series with Todd Gordon, he explains that an important part of leaving Pennsylvania was getting enough shows going in different markets to keep his roster in work. Many of the shows I'm going to talk about were his attempt to do that. In Todd's words in that interview, the key to keeping your talent is giving them work, to be honest with you. So we were always looking for different places to work. As a result, you're not going to see a lot of the shows I'm talking about in this video, but I have gotten as much information as I can about them. In their first year, ECW would bounce around a few different venues before eventually finding what would become their home in '93. Perhaps the most important early development would be them finding the ECW Arena, where they first ran in May and would reliably come back to for many years. Once Todd and his crew settled into a venue, they were then able to venture out of it and across state lines. In June, Dave Meltzer would write in the Wrestling Observer that ECW is talking about trying to put together a real circuit with house shows in the Philadelphia area 4 nights a week. It's not clear though whether these 4 shows per week would be in addition to Todd trying to break into new places, or an attempt to replace some of the Philadelphia shows, and not risk overexposing his product to the same markets. The first time ECW would venture out would be on October 16, 1993, when they would first run in Maryland. Looking at a map of the US, you might expect ECW to want to journey north to New York, but they would actually head south. Based on census data, New York City's population is higher than the entire state of Maryland, so that's where I'm drawing that assumption. Obviously, I'm approaching this as an outsider, so if I'm missing something, please let me know in the comments. ECW's first show in Maryland wouldn't be taped for television, but there was something quite noteworthy to come out of it. I mean, sort of noteworthy, but you'll get what I mean. A new championship would be created that was so short-lived, not even an image of it seems to exist online. The ECW Maryland State Championship. There was a precedent for creating this title though. On May 14, '93, but airing in June, the company held a battle royal, crowning Tommy Cairo as the first Pennsylvania state champion. This belt would only change hands once, with Tony Stetson winning it in August. The title would disappear shortly after, being deactivated even before the Maryland title came into being. So it doesn't appear like they planned on having separate belts for each market they ran in at the same time. On the first show, held on October 16, '93, at Cecil Community College, JT Smith would win a battle royal, becoming the one and only Maryland champion. There are no records of JT ever defending the title, or even having it on television. For his next few TV appearances, we don't see him make an entrance, nor does Joey Styles make any reference to the title. In March '94, JT would pin the Tasmaniac to become the television champion, and his previous title was really never mentioned by ECW, not that it ever was before. When the company returned to Maryland in mid-November, JT Smith, who had been the champion of that state for a month by then, wasn't even on the card. To be fair though, this was a co-promoted event with the locally based Mid-Eastern Wrestling Federation. Speaking of the MEWF, their promoter Dennis Whitwreck's surname was the inspiration for another wrestler's name, future Triple Crown winner Mikey Whipwreck. In July 1994, Dave Meltzer would comment on this in the Wrestling Observer. This group also has the most interesting names for its jobbers, many of whom are named after local indie promoters that they have heat with, like Joel Hartgood, and even cult hero jobber and TV champ Mikey Whipwreck was named after Dennis Whipwreck, another local promoter. It's said that Paul Heyman was responsible for these names, a man who has never been known for subtlety, has he? In the interview with Sean Oliver that I mentioned earlier, for a kayfabe commentaries release about ECW's early years, Todd explains an issue that they faced when they got to Maryland. On the day of the show, he encountered a representative of the State Athletic Commission, who told Todd that if there was any blood, he would shut down the show. This may have put Todd off returning to the state in general, because he says that they really curtailed us at that show, and we decided that Maryland maybe wasn't going to be the best. Sean briefly asks Todd if the Maryland state title was never seen again after that one night, and Todd simply responds, correct. Given the bad experience that Todd seemed to have had in Maryland, the reluctance to ever acknowledge the title they created, and the attitude of the Athletic Commission, I wonder if their expansion there could possibly have been a bit premature. In Hardcore History, an unofficial retelling of ECW's history, author Scott Williams notes that their coverage in the state was improved around July 1995, but it's not clear how visible they were before then. Perhaps this is why it took quite a while until they ventured back out again. Maryland would be the only new state that ECW would visit in '93, but in the following year, a massive one for ECW in terms of changes to the company. They would travel to a few more. In the 2005 book Turning the Tables, author John Lister includes an interesting quote from Todd, referring to the company in 1992, before they even had a television show. Back then, my big idea was to one day run Delaware. The boyhood dream would come true for Todd on March 26, 1994, when ECW would in fact make it to Dover, Delaware, roughly 80 miles from Philadelphia. While it's not overtly said, Todd might have had ambitions to run Delaware because his predecessor, Joel Goodhart's Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, would go there, with it as well as New Jersey making up the Tri-State name, but it would take a bit longer to get there. The card itself looks fairly unremarkable, ending with a battle royal won by Road Warrior Hawk, who at the TV taping in the ECW arena on the following night would be positioned as the next person to challenge for the heavyweight title in April. This time the battle royal was not for a Delaware championship, because lessons may have been learned. The reason for the card looking this way may have been because earlier on in the same day, ECW ran Ultimate Jeopardy in Devon, Pennsylvania, main evented by a War Games match where every participant had something on the line if they should be the one to lose. This match had been heavily built up on television with the idea that somebody was going to have to pay a huge forfeit. It looked odd to me that two shows would happen with many of the same wrestlers 80 miles apart on the same day. But the Wrestling Observer confirms that this did in fact happen. Ultimate Jeopardy, where Shane Douglas would pin Terry Funk to win his second ECW heavyweight title, took place in the afternoon, while the Delaware show ran later that night, where Shane would defend his title and get DQ'd in a match against Funk when Mr. Hughes would get involved. While all of this was going on inside the ring, what's perhaps more interesting are some pretty wild claims that Todd Gordon makes in his 2023 autobiography about the Delaware debut show. Although ECW would return to Dover, This would be the only show of theirs that takes place at William Henry Middle School. Todd would explain why in his book. There were also a few occasions where new venues would get tapes of our most violent or sexually provocative angles with a note from a concerned citizen, saying that they didn't want this smut in their wholesome city of Dover or Montgomeryville. Todd says that if this were a religious group or something similar, they would have taken credit for doing so publicly. But this not being the case made him think it was a rival promoter. He goes on to make a rather bizarre accusation over who he thinks that was, caused by his head of security Mark Shapiro calling Todd to the doors during a show. He'd nabbed two guys flattening fans' tires in the parking lot and was holding them for me. I headed outside and was surprised to see Dennis Coraluzzo and his flunky Gino Moore. There was now no doubt in my mind that Coraluzzo was behind the efforts to shut down our shows. We'll get more into Todd's growing feud with Dennis a bit later on, once ECW heads to New Jersey. But there's another show to talk about first. New York is one of the states where ECW would, over the years, go to many different venues. In New York City alone, there was the Lost Battalion Hall in Queens, the Sports Fest Center in Staten Island, the Elks Lodge, and finally the Hammerstein Ballroom. Despite being in an interesting sounding venue, their beginning in the state would be much smaller than their last time there, drawing a crowd of just over 300 fans. ECW would run at Yonkers Raceway on June 25, 1994. I couldn't find many pictures of the show, but reports from the time confirmed that this was the venue. Despite only being a house show, again not taped for television, ECW looks to have brought a strong card for their New York debut. 3 titles were on the line, though not a local belt like the Maryland title. 2 of those matches would end in a DQ, with Mikey Whipwreck keeping his TV title against 911, and Shane Douglas keeping his against Tommy Dreamer. The only title match with a clean finish would see the Public Enemy retain their tag team titles against the Bruise Brothers, later known as the Harris Twins. Mick Foley, who would make his first appearance for ECW a night earlier, was also supposed to wrestle on the show, but had been injured in his previous match, still appearing in a non-wrestling role. Also on the card that night, the Sandman would face Tommy Cairo in a Singapore cane match. This would occur 2 months before perhaps the most famous one of these, where Tommy Dreamer would face 10 lashes as a result of his loss to the Sandman. There is another reason that this show was likely not going to change much storyline-wise. It fell right in the middle of 2 more important events. On the day before, the promotion presented Hostile City Showdown, which included a wild brawl between the Funk Brothers and the Public Enemy. This would be the night when Rocco Rock was left hanging upside down by his feet off the Eagle's Nest by Terry, creating an iconic image. The main event of the night would be a dream match pitting ECW's Sabu against WCW's Cactus Jack, in which Sabu would win. Foley's loss would lead to the infamous promo where he would spit on his WCW Tag Team Championship, not exactly helping the relationship between the 2 companies. On the day after the New York show, there would be a TV taping of 3 Hardcore TV episodes, which included 4 title matches, as well as a steel cage match where Shane Douglas and Mr. Hughes would defeat the Bruise Brothers. It should also be noted that in mid-94, much like with Maryland earlier, ECW's television coverage in New York wouldn't yet be as widely available as it would become, with Paul Heyman getting the promotion on the MSG network in January 95. ECW wouldn't return to the state until a show in Middletown in July 95, with a much higher attendance reported, and it would take until December 29th of that year for them to have their first event in the Big Apple, at the Lost Battalion Hall in Queens. The final state that I'm going to cover in this video is New Jersey. From 1997 until the end, ECW would visit the Garden State quite frequently, but before that would come a near 3-year gap. This is because their first time in the state wouldn't exactly be successful, or without drama. On July 17, 1994, the promotion would visit the Wildwood, New Jersey Convention Hall, about 80 miles from the ECW arena. In Shane Douglas's kayfabe commentary's timeline about ECW in '94, he explains that Wildwood was a logical choice, at least on paper, for us to go. It was in driving distance and seemingly a party town, which would have been perfectly right for ECW. However, according to Sean Oliver, who is interviewing Shane, it would only draw 200 fans, which would result in a return date on August 12th being cancelled. According to Numbers on Cage Match, when they revisited the same venue in '97, the attendance would be 1,350, nearly 7 times higher. Much like many of the other events I've talked about, this one would come right after a big show for the company. A day earlier, ECW presented Heatwave '94, in which the main event would be a no-rope barbed wire match between the Funk Brothers and the Public Enemy. Despite going through this violent match, Rocco and Grunge would defend their tag team titles in Wildwood against the Bad Breed. I hinted at it earlier, but I have to address it more here. The New Jersey debut would only serve to create more bad blood in the feud between local promoters Todd Gordon and Dennis Coraluzzo. The feud between Todd and Dennis is frankly very messy, and one where both blamed each other for being the one to cross the line. It deserves its own deep dive, so I've only included relevant points here. Previously, the two had a working agreement that both would stay in their own territory and would not use each other's talent. Although there were things that had happened earlier, Todd was especially unhappy when Dennis began booking Sabu in January '94, claiming that he was a free agent. Sabu had only been with ECW for a couple of months at this point, so you could argue that he wasn't exclusively an ECW guy. But clearly Todd didn't see it that way, and he was especially annoyed when Sabu was booked in a match with Chris Benoit in Cherry Hills, New Jersey, which is about 10 miles from Philadelphia. Though not literally crossing the state line, it was close enough for Todd to head into New Jersey himself. Much like the tire incident in Delaware that I talked about earlier, Todd no doubt blamed Dennis for the poor house. In Shane Douglas's kayfabe commentary's release, he notes other things that Dennis would do, such as putting in overcrowding complaints and putting flyers on cars outside the ECW events. Shane also points out the absurdity of these two men bickering over territory like they were Vince McMahon and Ted Turner, on a much lower scale, noting that they were two very small companies that were fighting like WCW and WWF. It should be noted though that Shane Douglas wasn't exactly an innocent bystander though. I've decided to end with Shane's account of things because of what happens next and his involvement. Just over a month after the Wildwood show, in what would perhaps be the biggest shot fired against Dennis and the NWA, Shane threw their World Championship belt to the ground just minutes after winning it. Not long afterwards, the company would break away from the alliance and change their name to Extreme, and nothing would ever quite be the same for them. You might have noticed that many of the shows I've talked about in this video were not at all that successful, certainly compared to what ECW would become. Most of the states I've talked about in this video would receive later visits from ECW, and in return, much bigger crowds would turn out for them. The promotion would never go back to Maryland though, perhaps in case JT Smith was expected to defend his title. More importantly, ECW would visit many more new states over the next few years, on their slow journey from being a local promotion to becoming a national one. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.